All right, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Kumusta po tayong lahat? Isang magandang umaga po sa lahat. Welcome to our 8th episode of our Revitalizing Socio-Ecological Production Landscapes and Seascapes webinar series. So this is our 8th episode, and we're going to have a lot of jam-packed speaker and discussant po ngayong umaga. So let me just welcome po ang ating mga participants sa ating Zoom na nag-message po or nag-greet po sa ating lahat. So from Negros Occidental, good morning po. We have participants from Polytechnic College of Botolan. Welcome. Good morning po. Of course, acknowledging yung ating presence ng our project leader, Dr. Inocencio Buot Jr. Good morning po. And yes, we have our resource speakers from the National Museum of the Philippines and the Vice President for Research and Extension, ang ating pong discussion. And of course, we're also live po on our Facebook page. So the link po is already sent sa ating Zoom chat. And we also have participants from Pampanga State Agricultural University. So feel free to greet everyone here on Zoom. You are all welcome. If you have, if you know any peer or colleague who would benefit sa ating pong topic ngayon on Ifugao Rice Terraces, then you may do so. You may share po yung link ng Facebook, and you will also share po yung Zoom details that was sent to your emails. Okay, so again, we would like to welcome and we thank you all for your interest in joining this webinar series. So this webinar aims to raise awareness on the conservation and sustainable use of socio-ecological production landscapes and seascapes or SEPLs through a series of online talks on Satoyama principles and associated practices as approaches to sustainable management and biodiversity conservation. So by the way, I am Anne, and I will be your host for today. So this webinar series is organized by the Project 1 of the Emerging Interdisciplinary Research Building Climate Smart Communities program of UP Los Baños and UP Open University. So before we begin, let me just, so before we begin, today's topic is entitled Assessment of Ifugao Rice Terraces, a Satoyama Landscape. And this will be followed by the discussion on and an open forum. So please note that the webinar is recorded and the video will be made available in our website and YouTube channel. So let me just remind everyone to kindly keep your microphones muted when our speaker and discussant is presenting. And if you have any questions or clarifications while the talk is ongoing, please send your questions using the Zoom chat or the Facebook Live comment, and we will take note of those questions and acknowledge them later during the open forum. And the link to the evaluation form will also be sent after the open forum, and the certificates will be sent to the email indicated in the form. So kindly make sure that the email is valid and correct so you will receive the certificates properly. Okay, so to formally start our program today, on behalf of Project 1, on behalf of our project leader and project team members, the EIDRV SMART program, and the Philippine Satoyama team would like to thank you all for your interest in joining our webinar series. The socio-ecological production landscapes and seascapes or SEPLs originally came from the Japanese word Satoyama and Satoumi, which is anchored from the principle of living in harmony with nature. And this event aims to enhance the awareness of the SEPLs or the Satoyama Satumi concept as a strategic approach to biodiversity and ecosystem landscape seascape conservation. So we hope that we will all have an inspiring and productive webinar this morning, and feel free to engage, to ask questions, to be active in this webinar. So everyone is welcome. If you have any insights or experiences as well, you may also share it to us. Okay, so let me formally introduce to you our guest speaker. Our speaker is a supervising administrative officer at the National Museum of the Philippines. She was a former director of the research and development of the globally important agricultural heritage systems. In 2018, she was a project manager of the Ifugao Satoyama Meister Training Program at the Ifugao State University. And I also believe that currently we have some participants from the Meister training programs. We have some trainees here with us, invited here in their webinar. So in 2019, she also became the manager of the CTPILS, or the Center for Taiwan Philippines Indigenous Knowledge, Local Knowledge, and Sustainable Studies, which is a collaboration of the Ifugao State University and the National Chengchi University of Taiwan. So ladies and gentlemen, let us all give a warm virtual clap to Ma'am Eulalie Dulnuan. Welcome po, ma'am, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Miss Anne. I'm speaking from Tiangan, Ifugao. So, hello everyone from Tiangan. Let me start. Let me share my screen. That should work. Naka-slideshows mode na siya?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay
Clear
na,
na po.
Great, great. So, I'm Eulalie Dulnuan, as Miss Anne said. I am now with the National Museum of the Philippines. I'm now an artifact because I'm in the museum. And yes, last year I was with GIAS, Research and Development Center of the Ifugao State University. And we had this project, research project, and that is what I would like to share with you now. So I'm very thankful and grateful to the Philippine Satoyama project through Dr. Inocencio Buot Jr. for this opportunity to share with you the results of this research project. I'm quite confident now because we have here with us Romeo Gomez of Benguet State University. Kumbaga, I'm standing in the shoulders of these giants, of these scholars, Doc June Buot and Doc Romy Gomez. So, yes, the topic we have is the assessment of the Ifugao Rice Terraces as a Satoyama landscape. I would like to start this with a timeline of how we reached the point that we have to have assessment. So let me start 50 years ago in the 70s. The Ifugao Rice Terraces was declared as a national treasure in the Philippines, of the Philippines. So it was recognized as part of our national patrimony through a presidential decree in 1973. So the Ifugao Rice Terraces was also declared as a World Heritage Site by the World Heritage Center of UNESCO, and this was in 1995. Its category, usually when we have World Heritage Sites, they have categories, but for the Rice Terraces, it was categorized under Living Cultural Landscapes. So medyo naiiba siya. And then, however, in six years later, the Ifugao Rice Terraces was placed in the list of World Heritage Sites in danger. And this was because of, shall we say, globalization, climate change. So there was observable deterioration. There was a lot of problems, as mentioned by Doc Joanne a while back. There was out-migration, there was waning interest in indigenous knowledge, there's erosion of customary and social institutions. So this was observed. So to help in the conservation, it was placed in the list of World Heritage Sites. In 2011, but actually it was also in 2004, the United Nations, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, declared the Ifugao Rice Terraces as a globally important agricultural heritage systems. So this was in recognition of its rich biodiversity. Then thankfully in 2012, the Ifugao Rice Terraces was removed from the list of World Heritage Sites in danger. This was maybe because everyone put their acts together and somehow the situation improved, but still the same, some challenges and issues were still observable. That's why mm, it's good that in 2013 there was an international forum of GIAs. It was held in Noto, Japan, and there was an agreement that there should be a twinning of GIAs designated sites between a developed country, that would be Japan, and a developing country, that would be the Philippines. So that's how the concept of having an Ifugao Satoyama Meister training program was started. And I'm glad to say that Doc Buot and Romy Gomez were part of this conceptualization team. So they together with their guidance, the Ifugao State University was able to implement and start the ISMTP program. So this is a human capacity training program for community members so that they will be able to conduct, shall we say, research projects and to look into how they can help in the conservation of the rice terraces. So so that's 2014. Then in 2015 rather, the Ifugao GIAS Center, the Ifugao GIAS Research and Development Center was established. And this is a very good move by the university because this research center was the one that handled the ISMTP program. So from phase 1, every 3 years, it moved to another phase, phase 2. All the time, both phases were, shall we say, sponsored by the JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency. And, in 2018, it was in 2018 that Professor Koji Nakamura, who was the executive director of the ISMTP, started telling us about the JSSA, which is the Japan Satoyama Satoumi Assessment. And this is where the initiatives for an assessment of the Ifugao Rice Terraces began. So we were, through his guidance, we were given cluster reports that they have done in Japan. We tried to understand the approach and try to see how it can be done in the Ifugao Rice Terraces. In 2019, there were lots of goings on. Ifugao State University was welcomed as a new member of the International Partnership for Satoyama Initiatives, or IPSI. And this was very helpful in the sense that we were able to acquire financial support for the conduct of the Ifugao Rice Terraces assessment through the financing arm of IPSI, which was the Satoyama Development Mechanism, or SDM. Oh. And then still in the same year, it was quite a great year because we had this partnership with the National Chengchi University, and we put in investments for the indigenous education of teachers, DepEd teachers. And this was through the establishment of the International Innovation Center for Indigenous Studies. So that's all in 2019. Then in 2020, in spite of the pandemic, we really had to start the collection of data with the Ifugao Rice Terraces assessment. So this was doable in spite of the pandemic because it is the search for studies and researches done related to the Ifugao Rice Terraces. So this can be done online. And then we also asked for databases from the study areas where the World Heritage Sites, municipalities that were included as World Heritage Sites. So these are Kiangan, Hongduan, Mayuyao, and Banawe, of course. Banawe, Ifugao. So we were able to collect some information so that in 2022, we were ready to present the results to the public. But it was also in 2021 that we were able to sort of show the sustainability of the ISMTP, this time launching the third phase, and it's not anymore funded by JICA. This time it's all funded under the Ifugao State University. So it was in March of this year that the first rice terraces assessment international summit was held. Down. So actually, the Satoyama Development Mechanism, or SDM, the one who funded the project research, required that all results of this research should be shared or presented to the public. So the best way we thought of during, because it was still pandemic, was to present it online and face-to-face through an international summit. So we brought together all, not all, those relevant research conducted related to the Ifugao Rice Terraces. And they presented their findings in categories and sequences of the Ifugao Rice Terraces. So why do we have to do the Ifugao Rice Terraces assessment? So there has been numerous disjointed attempts to identify and address challenges related to the Ifugao Rice Terraces, and this resulted into many but varied responses and interventions by the government, by the academe, by non-government organizations. So there's this, it's important to put everything, all these initiatives into one so that the conservation would not be disjointed. So how did we do this? We looked into how the Japan Satoyama Satomi assessment did their assessment. It was quite complex, but through the guidance of Sensei Nakamura, we were able to quite identify how we were able to put logic in how we will do the Ifugao Rice Terraces assessment. So it was divided into four parts. So part one, we looked into the current conditions and trends of the Ifugao Rice Terraces 50 years ago, so that would be in the 70s. Part two, we look into the drivers of change. What caused the trends, what caused the current condition. And then part three was identify the responses to the changes in the landscape. So, and then finally, part four was the looking into the future of the rice terraces 50 years from now. So we have what I did was get the recap of all these parts. So, and also to show you how we collected the data, because you can imagine the complexity of the data that was collected. We categorize it according to the ecosystem services. So we looked into provisioning services. We looked into regulating and supporting services. We look into cultural services, and then of course, biodiversity. We saw changes, the trends, and the challenges that were encountered in each of the clusters. So as I said, the clusters, the study areas were Kiangan, Banawe, Hongduan, and Mayuyaw. These are the World Heritage Sites in Ifugao. So we go to the second part, which are the drivers of change. So this is to identify the factors and the direct and indirect causes of the changes in the landscape. So each municipality presented what they think were the causes. So we have here the highlights. So there's the change in cultural values, mainly education and religion. There's the observable disintegration of rice culture, maybe because of the new rice varieties and the invasive species. There's improved market access. So it put in the economic imperative as priority. And then there's poor monitoring and law enforcement. There's landlessness, really a big problem for IPs because we are illegal settlers. There's over exploitation and there's change in the land use. So for the third part, which was the responses, how then did local and international uh, agencies respond to these challenges? So we have policies. Doc Dina looked into several national and local policies that were related to the preservation and restoration of the Ifugao rice terraces. But of course, the implementation of these policies remain to be a challenge. There's initiative by the local government units. So like in Banawe, we hear, I think, mm, pinaka-popular yung sa Banawe, which was the Banawe Rice Terraces Restoration Program. But actually, all these clusters have their own restoration programs. So there's at the provincial level, we also have the ICHO, which is the Ifugao Cultural Heritage Office, which used to be Banawi Rice Terraces Task Force, and which used to be the Ifugao Terraces Commission. But all this, it's the same banana. They all manage the Ifugao Rice Terraces. So there's also intervention from the international community. One, of course, the globally important agricultural heritage systems. It was not just a designation. They also put in funds to ensure it being a GIA's site. There's the Central Cordillera Agricultural Development Center. This was a development program which was EU funded. There's also CHARM, Cordillera Highland Agriculture Development, which was also funded by the Asian Development Bank. So all these big projects put in millions of dollars into the restoration and conservation of the rice terraces. And then currently, in our own small ways, the Ifugao State University put in the Ifugao Satoyama Meister Training Program as a response, the Ifugao Indigenous Knowledge Educators Training Program also as an intervention for the conservation of the rice terraces. Highlights for this part, the interventions was the responses from the academe, from the local government unit, and from international collaborations. And then finally, there's the future of the rice terraces under plausible scenarios. This is looking into how the stakeholders would look into the rice terrace, look at themselves, look at the rice terraces 50 years from now. No, not 50 years, 30 years from now. So that would be 2050. So we went around, gathered stakeholders and did scenario planning, and they came up with interesting ideas. So in Honda One, they would like to have a data bank on environmental information. They would like to revitalize agri in tandem with culture. They would like to see their citizens, fully aware of culture, nature, heritage. And then, of course, they would like to develop tourism. In Mayuyao, they would like to have, by 2050, they would like to be a tourism destination featuring natural, historical, and cultural tourism. There's also the vision to see a community of environmental citizens, and they would like a governance that is with cultural investment. In Banawe, they would like to retain their being a tourism enclave. They would like to look into agriculture revitalization also. They would like to focus more on indigenous knowledge and systems and practices. And then there's also the interesting idea of having livelihood security, and they would like to do this um, through okay through making the terraces as a cooperative. It was really a very interesting possibility. And then in Kiangan, there's functional zoning system. We tried to have that, but we'd like to really put meat into that. There's agri-tourism for food and livelihood security. Contemporary agriculture system, maybe to maximize production. And then, of course, cultural and natural heritage integrity. So there you have it, encapsulates the Ifugao Rice Terraces assessment. Thank you po. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much po, Ma'am Eulalie Dulnuan, for presenting the assessment on Ifugao Rice Terraces and for your presentation on the initiatives conducted in the Ifugao Rice Terraces and the ongoing collaborations towards the conservation of IRT. And of course, we're presenting the drivers of change and the important role of the local government unit, academe, and the international partnerships. And of course, in responding and halting these challenges. It's also good to know the perspectives of the locals as well. How do they see the future and how we could come up with steps and strategies in order to realize those futures. Okay, so again, thank you very much, Ma'am Eulalie. Let's give Ma'am Eulalie a warm virtual applause. And if you have any questions to our speaker, please leave them on our Zoom chat. And of course, for those who are watching with us on Facebook Live, you may send your questions via comment section and we will take note of those questions and ask them after the discussion during the open forum. So before we proceed to the discussion, let me just formally introduce to you our guest discussant. Our guest discussant is a professor at the Ecology and Environmental Science of Benguet State University. He has a bachelor's degree in biology and a double master's degree in soil science and biology. He took his doctoral degree in environmental science at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, and he's currently the Vice President for Research and Extension and the current Dean of the National College of Highland Agriculture and Environment. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all give a warm virtual welcome to Dr. Romeo A. Gomez Jr. Dr. Gomez, welcome. And the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Ma'am Frances, for the introduction. Okay, we'll first, I'd like to congratulate Ma'am Lali, our very good friend, for presenting a very systemic perspective about the assessment of the Ifugao Rice Terraces. And thanks to, of course, the pioneer, the very strong advocate, Dr. June Boat. I know you're listening there. The other participants. I'd like to acknowledge also our participants from BSU. They are our students in the ES program, in the undergrad, master's, PhD Science Ed program. And also other colleagues in the Benguet area, in CAR, and of course in IFSU, and all the rest. Let me present my reactions as well as discussions on the Ifugao Rice Terraces assessment by Ma'am Eulalie Dulnuan. Because of the wide array of topics and allow me to just zero in on selected aspects, and hopefully this will give some sense of the overall picture of the IRT in terms of the assessment. Okay, let me start the discussion based on the topics that were presented. First would be on the historical perspective, and Ma'am Lali has a very clear picture of the, should we say, developments, or let's say the evolution of the present system that tries to analyze the dynamics in the Ifugao Terraces. In my own research, when I was doing my dissertation way back before 2000, so I encountered, of course, some legal books, and to cite one, we have PD 260, signed in 1973, calling for the protection and conservation of cultural and natural monuments. And in 1998, we have also PD 1505, which asserts that should be a prohibition for unauthorized modification and repair. Now, we know this is not given full justice, but I think in the restoration process, either the characteristics of the, whether it's a monument, a landscape that we're going to. We also take note that in the late 1990s, especially during the declaration of the IRT, Ifugao Rice Terraces, as a UNESCO World Heritage List, it was really an impetus because it put into a great focus the rice terraces into worldwide attention. So it bespeaks of its universality in terms of the value that we get. And it's also a very unique categorization because the IRT is described to be a living cultural landscape, which means it is something that we can feel, we can have a sense of in the present, and they are not simply a relic of the past. Perhaps to give sense, although Ma'am Lali has mentioned, the Banawe Rice Terraces Task Force, I think the original maybe unit that gave rise to the ITCHO and Ifugao Terraces Commission, as she has mentioned. But it's also nice to state that this was, when we talk of rice terraces, it was all centered in Banawe. So it wasn't really yung context by its but basta rice terraces, we tend to refer to the Banawe rice terraces. But of course, we have equally other magnificent rice terrace clusters. And this was one of the first offices that I constructed when they were in the process of doing some GIS mapping. So that was in 1998, 1999 period when it was so prohibitive to do GIS. And so I was looking for some partners where I can also have to share data and to do some digitization. So that was the attempt around 1998. And it was, I was glad to have, got some information, the Ifugao Terraces from the BRTTF. And we also understand the rice terraces is not just a wide ecosystem. More correctly, it's already a landscape because of the expanse of the area or the land, which is really made up of all those rice ponds or rice paddies. In terms of the rationale or the framework, there was a mention of a disjointed attempt, and I should agree because it was quite fragmentary. That when the attention was given, when it was declared as UNESCO Heritage Site, as a living cultural land, there was a scramble of efforts, to go to the place, assess it, and offer some restoration as well as management strategies to the provincial and to the local communities coming from the national. And largely, of course, we understand the excitement quoting management, but it also was a representation perhaps of not fully coordinated effort, or it's let's say a planned effort to contribute to the conservation and the maintenance of the rice terraces. But then we're happy that the UNESCO as a framework and it gave this status really to the Ifugao Terraces. Then quite lately, we have the globally important agricultural heritage and having the concept of Satoyama, Satoumi concept, where in Japan, these are forests or land coastal areas where we see a very close and some degree of sustainability in terms of human environment interactions. And so if we look at this framework, what is very important in its core is the use of biodiversity. But of course, before using that biodiversity, we should have that level of biodiversity and understanding the ecological flows that it provides, and ultimately economic flows and ecosystem services. There was also a statement on the rationale that the IRTA, or the, if take note, it's now Ifugao Rice Terraces to really mean. It's basically the entire province. Ifugao Rice Terraces assessment in unifying these initiatives. Yes, because to put into focus all the fragmented data and put them into a systemic view, and perhaps we can derive lessons on how to manage it in terms of a systemic manner. Because it's very important as part of systems analysis. We have to look at the boundary components that we have to zero in terms of putting the management effort. Although it's also an opportunity that maybe I have to make some clarifications, particularly on the IRT MA, or the Millennium Assessment. And if we remember, I was also Millennium Assessment discussion, and assigned to me was discussion number 2 on the drivers of change in the biodiversity and ecosystem. Perhaps because of some connectivity problems, and there was no clear frame that when we give the critiquing and discussions in the feedback, so that we would see if the statements are in proper places. So anyway, what I said, and I'd like to clarify, is that the areas or aspects on gender, ethnoecology, and modernization are to be considered, particularly in the management. Okay, they're not the drivers of change. These are to be considered because we know what gender is really, the contribution to development of the male and the female and perhaps other genders. And this is also related to the indigenous knowledge that they hold. So that's ethnoecology. One particular point I think that I mentioned in that discussion is that, for example, in my experience in Kiangan as well as in Nagakadan and in Bocos, Banawe, was that I saw that the women were important repositories of knowledge about seed selection. So take note, we gender in this particular respect. And modernization, because the advent of modern agricultural technologies have been a double-bladed, let's say, tool. So it really depends on how this is particularly used. So that if we simply survey on the drivers of change, that discussion contained statements about trying to differentiate the different of environment. And from the environmental science perspective, we have the biophysical. I simply represent it here as BP, and the other components of environment: social, economic, political, technological, and cultural. So that's how we look at environment. Other fields of specialization might look a little differently. What the environment? Anyway, that sense is all the more enhanced or enriched when we look at various perspectives and try to also have some other fields would look at it. So, for example, for the biophysicals, the lack of water is something that will change the land use. So, in relation to climate change, if there would be a prolonged, shall we say, decrease, this will translate to the decrease in irrigability, particularly of those devoted to organic production, and we know it will affect production and productivity. There are other considerations like declining fertility, especially if there would be lots of, or there is an increasing export of those materials. So what's important is to put them back in terms of using inago, kinago systems, etc., because this is part of nutrient cycling, as we declare in ecology. And the use of traditional rice varieties. Now, outside of this, we may be confronted with certain perturbations like high-yielding varieties being introduced to the system, which is not native to the place, together with the attendant application of fertilizers and pesticides. It might destroy the native ecology of the soil, as well as the interaction of the plant with its environment. And of course, drivers of change in terms of the sociological level, it is well documented in several empirical studies that interfacing with market economy is one of the strongest drivers that will withdraw people from their traditional practices. Well, it's because of money, they say. And sometimes when we go for agricultural productivity, we'd like to produce a lot of these commodities. We need to supply the nutrients, and so fertilizers and pesticides would come in. And trade-offs. So these are basically an interaction of different environmental components serving as drivers of change. Okay, so I hope I have made a clarification on that. On the next note, it's the next discussion on the keynotes. Again, let's have some topics here. Because of the wide array of discussions, then let's just look at key discussions here. The presentation have shown basically some data about Kiangan and Hunduan socio-ecological production landscapes. And I agree from the data that was generated, and even comparing to mine sometime in 2000, published 2008 until to 2014 or something, Kiangan is, really regarded as a highly disturbed, in terms of its state of its socio-ecological system or ecological production system. Understandably, when I did some literature reviews, Kiangan was the center of semi-temperate vegetable production in 1900. So we can just imagine the historical context and how it changed some mindset of people in terms of interfacing with the market economy, as I mentioned. And so this is something that should be guarded. But it's quite difficult to do a sort of a chemical equation that you have to balance. There's that issue about productivity and economic development, economic needs, particularly community vis-a-vis environmental protection. So it's really it has to be a rational balance, we say. In the there was one point where it said farmers did not readily accept the use of the watershed as a management unit. Well, looking from it in terms of science and technical understanding, watershed, looking at the watershed systemically would be understanding the different components that will actually interact. And probably just a clarification on how this data was gathered. How was this particular item presented when the gathering was undertaken? Perhaps, maybe it was in some ways the questionnaire or maybe in the communication. Because if we have to look from other analytical perspectives, the spatial integration of the landscape elements, whether this is the forest, this is the payo or the rice terraces, the uma, the settlements and other landscape elements, they have been established, maintained, and practiced by people and their ancestors. So it means that it was, of a continuing and evolving knowledge about landscape ecology in this particular area of the Ifugao Rice Terraces. And so I would have come to the position that the present tillers, the present farmers have gotten this knowledge from their ancestors. And I would advance the position that this is an exemplification of ancestral or indigenous cosmology. So it's really a known thing for them. They understand, although perhaps it's not from the scientific parlance that we'd like to see, but they understand the native ecology and functional and sustainable at that. So this is, a representation of a functional knowledge, interface, and connectivity. Perhaps I'd like to review this because, the cosmology is something that's very important and will have a wide-ranging effect in terms of management, especially if we move with this kind of modernization in our. If I have to base my experience from the empirical data I gathered, although of comparison was between Nagakadan as a UNESCO site, when you go some kilometers in the higher altitudes. But I tried to compare this with, let's say, Bocos in Banawe, where there are some differences in terms of the production system. What's observable, particularly on the land utilization types, we talk of the rice terraces, and what comes to mind would be the traditional rice varieties. But it is historical. As I said, in Nagakadan, there was the introduction of HYV rice. In the past decades, also vegetable gardens, vegetables. And you cannot avoid not to associate with fertilizers and pesticides as inputs. Okay, I just made here a tabulation from the results of my study that in terms of inorganic production, the relative comparison between the two sites, it's higher in Nagakad, very, very low in Bocos. Well, it supports the fact that the introduction of vegetable or semi-temperate vegetables happened during the American period. And therefore, it's also understandable that with this introduction, they also tried to introduce HYB of rice. So that relatively, we can say that this is higher in Nagakadan and of course, very seldom or very low in Bocos. At the time, I made the study in around 2000 and some follow-ups until 2008. So that's the difference. And we see now how agricultural or modern agricultural technologies being introduced to address economic needs and economic productivity may sometimes, may or will compromise environmental sustainability. In terms of some parameters, I have the data some decades ago. The organic matter is higher in Bocos because it's really, I would say at that time, certified organic production systems. In Nagakadan, that is also correct, but it is interrupted by a growing area devoted to inorganic production, and it's a reality. So it has actually impinged now on the present soil system, and we would surmise even the productivity. And it was also during this time that the giant earthworm issue came about, and I think I first studies here, and because of the introduction of fertilizers and pesticides, explains why quite acidic in Nagakadan that resulted to lower earthworm density, and so the damage was lower compared to Bocos, which where I recorded a higher damage because of the highly organic nature. And you see the affinity of earthworms. So this was published in 2005 in the Philippine Agricultural Scientist. So what I'm saying in this analysis, we can also look at other areas where there is now a growing introduction of modern agricultural technologies in the production system, particularly on inorganic production. It might, have trends, and it would be a good guide. In terms of food supply contribution, again published in IJEC, of course with the leadership of Doc Buot when he asked us to come up with a number of papers for these publications. It was documented that in Kiangan, based on the native rice varieties planted, it was just about able to supply 35% the food supply in terms of the native rice consumption in 2008, given that level of population. And compared to Bocos, a little more than one half in terms of the percentage. So I guess from these things, when we have this community that is supposed to be using indigenous commodities, as part of the rituals, it may somehow have some effects. So that's on the aspect of culture. And of course, nutrition, because we believe that these kind of varieties are more nutritious and more satiating. In terms of land uses, again, it may be a lesson for other emerging areas that go for inorganic production. So a land use change was observed in published in 2004. For high-yielding varieties of rice, I have observed about 10 to 15% in Nagakadan, because practically none. Traditional rice varieties stood at about 65%. So I think there was a considerable decrease into 65% of the area devoted to native varieties. But in Bocos at that time, it was, of course, still okay. And the entry of vegetable gardens, well, we know it has addressed to some extent economic needs of people and some food security, but we are also concerned about the attendant production system that might compromise longer-term sustainability of the soil. Well, abandonment is, of course, documented in many areas in the Ifugao Rice Terraces. On the specific recommendations based on some degree of analysis, we understand there were several data generated so that they came up with this. And one of the statements was the recommendations would be the pilot testing of sustainable livelihoods through technical and financial support from concerned institutions. Probably, I'd like to pose this question to Ma'am Lali. What particular mechanisms, so that we'd see how this can actually be suitable in terms of stimulating or bringing about a better perspective and way of sustaining society and hopefully leading to sustainable development. Perhaps some of the recommendations that I can bring out, there are several, but key points. The first one is mapping or GIS. So remember, we had this attempt earlier on before 2000, but now it's nice to track the changes in terms of land resources, in terms of land uses and land utilization types in agriculture. So when we say land utilization types, this may be the amount of energy that is put into its production in terms of the number of stakeholders that, or maybe the farm that put manpower into its production and some other technical characterizations. These are what we call the LUTs. And basically, whether it's a land use or LUT, the spatial extents are very important because we are now talking about landscape change. So at the rate landscape change is occurring, until when do we have a sustainable system of production to support population needs and to support other economic endeavors? perhaps that has to be given some considerations. And other quantitative metrics, we know qualitative, contributes to giving of this changing landscape. One of the I'm looking at are carrying capacities and impact studies. If Ma'am Lani remembers, she invited me to speak about carrying capacity in Kiangan sometime in 2005 or 6. I'm not very sure. No, 2013 or 2012. And I had discussed about models of doing carrying capacity estimation and coming up with a frame to establish a carrying capacity model for a given. And I think we need to look back and have this kind, because we should know how present systems are being impacted by present economic activities. And so we can project into the future what might happen if we talk of sustainability. Others would include economic or functional, like payment for environmental services and other schemes. Very important now with the advent of climate change would be hydrological and water allocation studies. So take note, it's already very strongly established that the amount of water discharged by our microforests are very important in the maintenance of rice terraces. If it has to maintain that majestic state, and in terms of supporting populations and addressing sustainability, have to be looked into in terms of the water and relating it to productivity and sustainability. And lastly, capitalizing on Satoyama, Satoumi, GS, or whatever, it's really a core discussion on biodiversity. And we know that the biodiversity provides, as I said, ecological flows and ultimately economic flows. So perhaps it's also nice again to do some analysis of the changing spatial extents and the changing biodiversity because of land use and climate change, or climate change itself, so that we will have a better way on how to do the environmental modeling for management purposes and preparing for the future. So these are periodic and time series in relation to ecosystem services. Others, we'd also like to look at natural enemies in traditional rice-based ecosystems, because support to the organic production system. If there would be very little or no pesticides, then let's look at some other ways in terms of biological control or maybe integrated pest management. And lastly, for the future of the rice terraces, I took note, and it's quite commendable that the framework for developing some sort of specialization by having the unique advantages offered by these identified heritage sites. There were or even 5. But again, let's go back to looking at what's tourism really for money purposes, economic purposes, and ecotourism, where it should be a subdued type, and still go for environmental education, as well as putting measures so that we will be able to conserve this particular system. So that's ecotourism in the, and the carrying capacity measurement is very important. Because we know the impacts, once they are there, it would be quite difficult to reverse, even we talk of mitigating measures. So it's always nice to have a precautionary outlook according to the precautionary principle. And lastly, we get a lot of lessons from, again, Dr. Booth's lead and with the other 2 editors in Springer Nature book writing on biocultural landscapes in the Anthropocene. So I think it puts into focus the very diversifying activities of human in terms of how they exploit natural and biological resources. And let's look at how we should not really put a stop, but perhaps to come up with some interface that would be at a sustainable rate. Easier said than done, but we need some more in-depth studies to guide us in terms of our management system. And of course, let's capitalize on these frameworks, particularly Satoyama, GIAS, etc. And what's nice is that the GIAS, with the lead of the group of Sir Ed Keblatin and Biofin, they discuss about how NIAS nationally agricultural heritage systems and locally important agricultural heritage systems will now, for example, be really not just recognized, but then it will be truly, really operationalized at the community level where people can actually put their share in terms of planning together with other actors in society. And they have identified two areas. We have indigenous agroecosystems, definitely, where the IRT and some other similar ecosystems in CAR. And I'm also one strongly advocating, let's look at Benguet, because we have also very similar ecosystems in terms of traditional rice-based ecosystems having this kind of production systems, be recognized as NIAS and LIAS, and therefore a more concerted and more planned maintenance as protective measures can be instituted. The other is, of course, indigenous agroforestry systems. And we have seen this in so with this, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you got some, well, bits and pieces of, well, that I offer in this particular forum. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for Dr. Romeo Gomez for that very wonderful presentation and reaction on the on our speaker's presentation earlier. Of course, thank you for providing us the different perspectives of assessing the IRT historically, ecologically, for emphasizing that our rice terraces are living landscapes. They're living, they are not relics. And we also have seen, as presented by Dr. Gomez, the empirical studies, how the erosion of traditional varieties is really evident, and it is also due to the market economy, our goal for agricultural productivity, and how it compromises environmental sustainability. We've also heard recommendations from Dr. Gomez on mapping, the use of GIS, quantitative studies, studies on carrying capacities, impact studies for our MS students and BS students here watching with us. You could actually explore. Ang dami na pong mga recommendations o mga ideas on theses, on manuscripts that you could write on. And of course, it was also mentioned hydrological and water allocation studies, of course, biodiversity studies, aligned as well, climate change, adaptations, and other practices, and for the better management and for the preparation of the future of our indigenous landscape. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Gomez. So right now we're going to start our open forum. So if you have any questions or clarifications for our speaker and our discussant, you may now send them on our Zoom chat. So again, thank you. Thank you, Ma'am Eulalie Dulnuan and Dr. Gomez. We're going to read one question here from Ma'am Teresita Borromeo. So how do you address outmigration and shifting of TRVs to high-value vegetables, especially in Hiangan? Many of the terraces had been abandoned, and biodiversity at all levels in the IRT landscape is indeed endangered. So perhaps we could hear from Ma'am Eulalie.
Outmigration. Actually, it's also interesting on the topic of outmigration. When the pandemic happened and everyone was told to go home, everyone has to go home. The local government units made this big effort to get everyone home. Then I think that also put into the head of this of the youth who were brought home, that they can be able to stay in Kiangan, in their hometown, and do their work. So I hear of especially with online jobs, online those with online career, they found out that they can be based in Kiangan and still have a career online. Yeah, but that's of course that's minor compared to the bigger problem of outmigration in terms of the brain drain, like almost all households in the Philippines yata has someone outside the country, um either as a domestic helper or as a blue collar job, having a blue collar job. So I don't know, maybe it's the president's job to to bring back everyone home. Yeah. But let's hear the take of Doc Romy about outmigration, and especially with the change in rice varieties, because actually Sitmo is saying there's only three traditional rice varieties already in Nagakadan. So naglesen pa ho yung 10 na sabi ni Doc Romy. And yes, it's because also there should be a political will in making sure that we regain or get back our traditional varieties. When disasters happen and they are telling farmers that to help you in recovering from a disaster, we will be distributing rice seeds, and the rice seeds they are giving would be the certified rice seeds from the lowlands. And then farmers, because it's free, and then there's this idea that it's to help me as a farmer recover, then they will get that, and then it's difficult returning back to the traditional rice varieties. Doc Rami, kayo po.
Thank you very much po, Ma'am Eulalie. Let's hear it from Doc Romeo.
Yeah, thanks, Ma'am Lali. Yeah, of course, we can offer some theoretical perspectives. It's really an admission that socio-cultural change is a very strong force to contend with. You cannot simply reverse it and simply put a complete stop to it. But there can be some options that we can venture into. For example, they say that increasing maybe non-farm or ecotourism enterprises in terms of economic opportunities may also help, because economics would be a very strong force. You have to really satisfy the plight of the stomach, so to speak. But if we are able to give economic opportunities, then it would be better. Now, for instance, in the production of rice, traditional rice, we can look at possible incentive systems. So I think this was also done in Banawe, where there are some premium prices for native rice varieties. And we can perhaps look at other ways of strengthening this, so that when we give this kind of incentive, hopefully it will also attract takers in terms of going for this kind of opportunity. And we would say there are perhaps other possibilities, because we cannot really have a grand plan for that. For instance, that there would be possible zoning in terms of land uses, and areas can specialize with, of course, some incentive systems. So it's really an intricate system if we understand, but we can start perhaps from these given points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Romeo, for that answer, and Ma'am Eulalie for your answer. I hope that our speaker and discussant was able to provide answers and elaborate more on the issue. Thank you very much, Ma'am Teresita, for that question. And now we're going to hear we have another question from Sir Dao Dao. Can the convergence approach or strategy used in IRT preservation be adapted in localities adjoining Ifugao? So perhaps you could hear first from Ma'am Eulalie.
So is Sir Lakay referring maybe to the assessment, like putting everything together into one? So if he's referring to that, then yeah, we were able to read into the JSSA, somehow adapt the MA. Actually, we were advised by the United Nations University from Professor Maiko Nishi to use the IPBES framework. I think they have improved the approach. So IPBES means Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. To be honest, we needed more time to fully understand that approach. Kaya hindi namin nagawa, hindi namin nagamit. But as I understand, it was an, shall we say, improved strategy, improved approach to making assessments.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma'am Eulalie. Maybe we could also hear from Dr. Romeo Gomez on his insights on the question.
Yeah, very much Dwight, actually. Dwight Lakaw daw for that insightful question. I'd like to say that we have to look at management structures in different hierarchies. I think in the Millennium Assessment, it was an assessment of how management was done at the community level, at the farmer level, and more or less in that particular locus, we understand their perspectives about it. But it's also nice that when we talk of convergence, I'd like to see it in the aspect of a holistic, participatory, and a democratic process where it's really a convergence of minds from different, for example, not just the political leaders, the governor, but also different agencies. If I have to inject yung committee natin, Ma'am Eulalie, when go to the Satoyama program, we have some meeting with the committee at the governor's level, with all the mayors, the other political leaders, and other agencies, where we discuss aspects that might relate with the preservation of Ifugao. It's really a myriad and a complicated thing because of several components. For example, if we manage rice terraces in terms of coming up with products that might gain some entry into markets, and yet it's sustainable because it can provide economic flows to the different stakeholders, then we might need the help of the DTI about it. So we have that committee na hindi lang nakafocus sa iisa na ecological. We really have to address systemically and coordinate. It's beyond coordination. It has to be a close interface among different agencies as well as different institutions. But as I said, merong hierarchy po yan. So while it's the management, top that will devise for some holistic systems, how would this be translated into lower hierarchies, enriching yung mga basic interactions in the community? This was also I raised in the biofin na para bang yung concept ng Science City, nandun lahat yung government agencies and other branches of government, including political leaders, such that if we would like to have a research about this, para hindi repeat, when in fact you have already the empirical data as management input, na meron na siyang repository because there's a close coordination among the different agencies. That's just in research. But what about if you now go for mature technologies? Kasi kung hindi mo alam yung information, nagre-research ka uli, nasasayang yung data. But when we have to store them into a particular database in that particular council na parang Science City concept, then perhaps it's easy to retrieve that information for management inputs. It's just like, it's similar to the Regional Development Council. All the heads are discussing about different activities in their sectors. And yet, there should be some close coordination, because if the some research data, they can perhaps ask the DOST, something like this. So I think convergence as an idea would occur at different hierarchies. Pero siguro ang isa rin doon is how we translate the locus of that convergence from the top going, having that kind of coherent translation into the lower echelons until there's now some fluidity reaching communities and households. That's how I look at it in the theoretical perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Romeo, for that answer. So I hope that our speaker in discussion was able to answer that question, Sir Dao. Okay, so we also have one question here from Doc Buot. How can LIAS be operationalized, perhaps in IRT? It must have been working well in the past, and what should be the essentials? Sige po, Doc Romeo, you may answer po. Sir, nakamute po kayo.
Okay. Yeah. Again, thank you very much to our mentor giving tough questions for discussions. How Dr. Jun, for example, the GS concept and is a concept that will move down into a national level. And we have the national government taking this seriously and integrating into sectoral concerns. If this would be cascaded into the local level, I think this will be more functional. Of course, not in just a top-down perspective, but the local governments or the local units, because they're the ones who are knowledgeable about the problems in their communities, can actually adapt these statements or advocacies or strategies from the national and harmonize at their level. And this can be done, for example, in a discussion in the municipio or perhaps in the barangay. But apart from discussions and coming up with plans and strategies, of course, there has to be some budgeting. We really need money to run and operationalize things and have people translate yung mga participatory processes, like yung mga plano na nabuo, that will be appropriate to be implemented in a particular community. That's how I see it. And so we now get the impetus from both the national as well as the community and household level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Romeo. Maybe we could also hear from Ma'am Eulalie on Dr. Buot's question.
Good. In Hongduan and in Hingyon, this FAO project tried to do LIAS, shall we say, documentation to make it LIAS. You know, they have to document everything for LIAS designation, shall we say, and recognition by their own SBs. So they have to have resolutions that the area, those municipalities are LIAS, locally important agricultural heritage systems. So they did that for Hongduan and Hingyon. I'm not the time that we were collecting data for the IRTA, for the assessment, was also the time that they were collecting information for LIAS designation. So we were a bit, doing workshops one after the other, FAO and IFSU. So that's why we were aware that they were really doing LIAS for Hingyon and Hongduan. When GIAS was active as a project of the FAO, one of them, the deliverables was for NIAS, how to identify the criteria for NIAS, because agad-agad napunta tayo sa global, sa GIAS. So the deliverable for that, I can remember, was for NIAS designations all over the country. But I'm not sure if they were successful in doing that, because until now, we don't have I don't think we have NIAS at the moment. So yun pong project that was finished just now ng FAO tried to do LIAS, locally important agricultural practices. Ang maalala ko that nang sabi ng focal person was the difficulty of documenting everything from the practices of the people. So they had to, and it was pandemic that time. So yun, I hope I need to ask the local person because he's from Tiangan, local or focal person, ano na yung status ng LIAS designation nila, yung Hongduan and Hingyan. And then I'll update po Doc June.
Okay, thank you very much po, Ma'am Eulalie, for that answer and for your personal experiences po on the LIAS in IRT. And we're going to entertain one last question. So this is from Ed Kiblatin, who is watching live from our Facebook page. So we'd like to ask if we have a rough estimate of the scope and scale of introduction of HYVs into the system. Could there be a process where a line is drawn that would strictly advocate or advise agri-program design for conserving more pristine zone, example, higher altitude systems of the total IRT system from the HYVs or vegetable gardens? Maybe Ma'am Eulalie could answer that first.
Yeah, but actually it's Sir Ed. That was the program of Sir Ed, like hindi ko maalala yung name ng program niyo, sir. The one with Richard Gadit. And that was looking into the rice varieties, right? So actually, si Sir Ed ang magsasagot niyan. But really, there has to be, it has to be, they have to put in logic when government, local government units in trying to help farmers, they inadvertently are introducing new varieties, or in the name of higher production. So there's high yielding varieties, and then as I said, it's difficult turning back into the traditional varieties. But maybe we should hear from Sir Ed, the result of that FAO project.
Okay, thank you very much po, Ma'am Eulalie. Maybe we could also hear from Dr. Romeo, his views on this question.
Yeah, again, thanks, Sir Ed Kiblatin, for that very incisive thought of yours. First, I'd like to say that, as I said, the data that I presented was, of course, way back, and the estimate was about 15% for HYV, etc. But it could have grown, as also evidenced by some studies coming in during the Satoyama, like in other places, like in Hongduan and some other areas. So we might presume it's really going up. And that's also, well, some perturbations that we need to look at. In terms of drawing a line, I think theoretically the idea is very sound, supposedly, if we are able to do that and put a distinction that will cater to this kind of production system, and perhaps one would cater to another with some forms of division. However, in reality, there are difficulties presented. For example, in the rice terraces, it is actually an individual decision making, you see. So you have to deal with farmers. So that's one. We cannot simply, of course, impose our wishes on them. So perhaps some kind of negotiation might be possible with, of course, some discussions, with planning, and some incentive systems to, I don't know if the right term, to down, so that they might adopt a particular absorption or implementation of a particular production system. Now, with different individuals or farmers, perhaps they need to be put together and we discuss with them as a group, I think that would be a more viable option. Once we are able to, convince them about such kind, then perhaps it would be more viable to proceed rather than addressing them at an individual level with different uh, uh, directions of decision making. So definitely that's a real challenge and very difficult given the realities in the community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for Doc Gomez for that answer. And yeah, it will be difficult, but still we need a participation, of course, from the locals, from the farmers, in order to make it more possible. All right, so I think that's all for our questions for the open forum for today. We thank you for thank you for all the participants who has sent in their questions, and thank you very much, Ma'am Eulalie and Dr. Gomez, Ma'am, for answering the questions. We will now proceed to the issuance of certificates. Let me just share my screen. Come on, why don't we give another round of applause for our speaker and for our discussion today? Ayan. Let me just share my screen. Okay, for awarding of our certificates. Again, we would like to thank you all, our speaker. Let us present this certificate of appreciation from the University of the Philippines Open University and University of the Philippines Los Baños, and the EIDRB Smart Program awards the certificate of appreciation to Ma'am Eulalie Dulnuan for serving as resource speaker during the webinar topic entitled Assessment of Ifugao Rice Terraces, a Satoyama Landscape. The Revitalizing Socio-Ecological Production Landscapes and Seascapes webinar series held on 27 October 2022 via Zoom, given this 27th day of October 2022 at the Institute of Biological Sciences, University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Signed, Dr. Ricardo Bagarinao, Professor and Program Leader, Dr. Inocencio Ibuot Jr., Professor and Project 1 Leader, and Dr. Joan V. Serrano, Professor and Program Manager. We'd also like to present this certificate of appreciation to Dr. Romeo A. Gomez Jr. for serving as discussant during the webinar topic entitled Assessment of Ifugao Rice Terraces, a Satoyama Landscape, of the Revitalizing Socio-Ecological Production Landscapes and Seascapes webinar series, given this 27th day of October 2022 at the Institute of Biological Sciences, University of the Philippines, Los Baños, signed Dr. Ricardo Bagarinao, Dr. Inocencio Buot, and Dr. Joan V. Serrano. And for our announcements, we would like to invite everyone once again, to our next episode of our webinar series, and to present the diversity of flora and fauna in Naungan Seascape and Lake Danao Forest Landscape by Dr. Arturo Ipasa of the Visayas State University. Dr. Art Pasa is actually one of our field supervisors in EIDRB SMARTS program, and he is going to present the data set, the preliminary assessment of our study site in Ormoc. So that is on November 29. That's a Tuesday at 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. So you may scan the QR code posted here on the image na nasa baba po, and then we'll also give the link to the registration form later on. And of course, we're going to provide a certificate of completion to those who will be able to participate the webinars from the very first since March and up to our last event on December 2022. Okay, so let me request everyone to open up their cameras for the photo opportunity. All right. Tanggalin ko lang po ang aking spotlight. So while we're waiting for everyone to open up their cameras, I will just send the link to the evaluation form. Let me just read po yung ating comment from Dr. Buot. Thank you everyone for your faithfulness in attending our webinar series, and thanks to Ma'am Lali and Doc Romy for the insights. I think meron din pong greeting si Doc Romy earlier. He was greeting Dr. Grace Manangan, the president of Botolan Polytechnic College, and the BSU, BS Environmental Science, and the MS students, for the faculty and colleagues and alumni of Benguet State University. Perhaps you want to be recognized by sending emojis. Ayan, nakikita ko na po ang mga pictures. Hello po, good morning po. Again, may I request everyone to open their cameras po so we could proceed with the photo documentation. Okay, so I think everyone is ready na po for the photo doc. Magpipicture na po ako. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Smile. Next page po. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Okay, so again, thank you very much for joining. Thank you for participating, and for those who given their questions and very much interested to be with us today. And of course, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude and deepest thanks to our speaker. Ma'am Eulalie Dulnuan and Dr. Romeo Gomez, thank you so much. We are very much honored to have you with us. And again, the evaluation link is already provided at our Zoom chat, and I will also send it later on sa ating Facebook Live. So we have 38 participants here on Zoom. Actually, earlier we are 40 plus participants, and we also have around 10 participants watching live. And I think I also saw some comment po doon, sabi doon meron pong proud advisee po doon si Doc Romeo. So, ayun. So, okay, so on behalf of Project 1, the IDRB Smart Program, again, we would like to thank you all for participating and for joining us today. And we hope that you learned a lot from our speaker and our discussant, and you will be able to apply this on your respective fields and perhaps have an idea for future studies for the betterment of our cultural landscape, our indigenous landscapes. So once again, thank you, and we hope to see you again on November 29. So mark your calendars, or better yet, register na po kayo once you have the link for registration. So that is all for today. Medyo sobrang nag-extend na po tayo, but I hope that it was worth your time. Especially for our speaker and our discussant. So have a great day, everyone, and God bless us all po.
Thank you very much.